Firstly, I would like to pay my respects to my guests today. In my culture, it is of great importance to pay respects to the elders or bosses of the country in which we enter the countries. I would never talk or walk on anyone's land without acknowledging and getting their blessing, and will now do so in my people's language, the Wyatt I of Western Australia. Fellow friends of this country of Israel, I speak to you today from my head, my heart and my spirit. I hope we walk forward together past today in the future, hand in hand for a better tomorrow. As part of that, I will leave this message stick that was created in Australia. It's made of glass. Traditionally it was made from wood, and the message on it depicts two campfires, the rainbow colours in the middle depicting all the different nations who have crossed from their home fires to this home fire to inspire the future leadership. And that's going to be left here at the centre. I'm honoured to share briefly my story of struggle and triumph in hopes that this incites much dialogue on how we navigate the space of empowerment for future generations of women, who I argue are not the leaders of tomorrow, but the leaders now. How we support, nurture and listen to their needs so we can make decisions that will best impact them, as the legacy we leave will be their reality. When I think of my childhood, it creates lots of different emotions. There were many years where reflecting on my childhood forced me into post-traumatic state of panic, fear and need for heavy sedation. For me now, I use that same reflection of the past to give hope, inspire and help many others understand the complexities of childhood trauma and the need to always listen and review what we do as leaders to create stronger futures for leaders of tomorrow. At the age of 4 to 12, I was subjected to sexual abuse by my grandfather, a trusted and devoted Christian man who highly respected in both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community. I was later told in life that it was his cultural right, and once they realised I wasn't that stupid to believe that, I was told that disclosing my abuse would shame the family. Then when I refused to be silent, I was threatened. For those who aren't aware, in Australia, our Indigenous peoples, or Aboriginal Australians as more commonly known, did not come under human rights conventions nor were identified as humans in our country until 1967. So our country still faces a separation or an us and them mentality between the non-Indigenous and Indigenous communities. As you could imagine, Indigenous women, as most women were back in the good old days, were subjected to gender bias and treatment, including the forced removal of children or the stolen generation, which occurred as Aboriginal mothers, due to their race, were not fit to be parents or caregivers of their own children. This was born from a policy of racial segregation, an attempt of cultural genocide under the 1905 Aborigines Act. This created the theory that Aboriginal race would die out due to being inferior. We still suffer from the previous legacy, mainly around issues of life expectancy, physical and psychological health, socio-economic issues, and cultural integration, which is labelled as being closing the gap. Even before then, the role of the various Indigenous women across our country was seldom documented by the early anthropologists and colonials that came to our shores, as the theory was that it was more important to focus on the patriarchal component of these native societies to grasp the inner workings of the Indigenous peoples. I'm sure it's sounding somewhat familiar for some of you. This was a real issue for women across the world, especially for our women in our culture, as women were highly respected and held important leadership roles and rights within our societies and respected by our men even till today. Everyone played a crucial role, and the teaching, mentoring and nurturing of our young people was imperative for the survival and the continuation of our culture, and still is today. However, the major impact of colonisation, the deliberate genocide of people and culture that occurred for over 200 years in Australia, and our nation's issue with teaching and understanding what impact this history has had until recently, has created a disconnection and disharmony of the traditional roles, rights and obligations of our people, including our young women. In Australia, there are over 300 distinct cultural groups and 600 languages, so we are not all the same, so experience differs from one to the other. And again, I'm sure this is no different from across the world. My theory is simple. Reconnection of country and culture for all people is critical to ensure the equality of all, so we can better understand, empathise and relate to one another. And if we understand each other despite our differences, we can better create integrated and respectful spaces to create change. This includes the role of elders, non-Indigenous people, men, women and young people. I found in my experience, and the many other strong women who have influenced me, have all found cultural and economic independence and strength by attaining qualifications. In Australia, especially the last decade, we have seen many Indigenous women obtaining law, business, commerce, human rights qualifications and other roles, including people like Hannah McGlade, human rights activist and lawyer, Tammy Solinek, Michelle Evans, Michelle Webb and many more. Plus, there are women in the community who, due to their commitments to the communities, have not official qualifications but inspire and mentor our future and current leaders, like Selena Eglinton, who has run a sexual health, suicide and healing program called Quatamaya Quab for decades, one that I used to attend, regardless of losing her son to suicide only 1 year prior. Like I tell the ones I mentor, especially young girls, leadership comes in many different forms. Being a mummy just demonstrates all the sorts of skills and resilience that can be transformed into the professional world, but if you want to be a lawyer, entrepreneur, human rights activist or whatever, you can do this too. You can also do it in conjunction of being a mummy, which I'm sure many of you have. However, education opens many doors in which I encourage young ones to find their passion and reflect on the journey of how to get there. Given the low socio-economic barriers our communities still face, our women can find empowerment by having the skills to be competitive in the professional world. In turn, this helps us break free from the grasp of the welfare dependency introduced during colonisation, but we need the support mechanisms on the ready, as it is no easy task and what is arguably a very patriarchal society. In 2006, after years of drug abuse, mental illness, violence, death threats and much more, I finally took control of my life and my destiny. As a 23-year-old woman, I reported, charged and successfully put in jail my offender. I was quoted by the local newspaper saying taking down my offender was like taking down the Prime Minister, but I did it. Who would have thought that it took... Who would have thought that it would take a young woman like me to finally end his reign of intergenerational trauma and terror? I was the first to break the silence on abuse in communities by sending a strong message of sexual violence is not part of culture. I am one of the youngest international entrepreneurs from my community, especially in consultancy, and although this might sound like me blowing my own trumpet, it is quite inspiring to young people knowing that you can be a leader at any time. Could you imagine the change young women could make in this world if instead of saying, why me, I can't, I won't, I'm too young, we started hearing, why not me, I can, I will, and my age is not a factor, as what I have to offer is of immeasurable value. Here I come. One of the factors that kept me on track, except my amazing husband to my right, was that I stayed at university the whole time. It gave strength to me and abilities during this time and is now my life work. 3 weeks after this court case, I discovered I was pregnant with my first child. I made a promise that I would not allow intergenerational trauma of sexual violence impact my child, and I would need to step out of my current situation and empower myself and create a healthy future for my child. Even in my late pregnancy, I stayed at university. Mid-semester, I gave birth, and 3 weeks later, I was back at university with a newborn hanging off the front of me. Upon completion of my degree, several years later, and working in public service for not-for-profit organisations for many years, my husband and I decided that we wanted another child. At the time, I was being groomed for an executive position in that government position I was in, and once they discovered I was pregnant, I was told that promotion has now been deferred, just in case you have a difficult pregnancy. As I left that role, I applied for another, in which I was successful. When I told the employer that I was newly pregnant and would need to take momentary leave within 6 months, for about 3 weeks, I was told that the offer had been revoked due to, quote, issues of finding a replacement during my leave. Despite my anger due to the obvious discrimination, It was evident at this point that I discovered I would need to find other ways to make an impact in this world. Thus, I created Haifa In, my company which encourages cultural diversity and change within Australian and now global corporations and institutions by providing training, research and consultancy, has been running for 4 years, and our ethos is Ngara Kulunbura, let's go forward together. Haifa In, and we acknowledge our knowledge, our hearts and our spirits as humanity does. That one commonality brings us together. When I consulted my husband with this idea, because I was 8 months pregnant and I wanted to start my company, he said, "This is your passion, I'll back you all the way." And we built my dream together. The research shows in Australia that 3 out of 4 Australian businesses, small businesses, fail within their first 3 years. Haifa In has tripled in growth. Despite what people tell me, I'm either arrogant or brave, maybe both, I will follow my dreams regardless. To be honest, 10 years ago I would not have imagined myself presenting to some of the most influential women of the world, and being considered one, about stuff that creates leadership. Referring to my journey, it's a humbling experience, I can tell you. However, I always remind myself that my actions will impact the future leaders, so I better make sure it's relevant to them, whatever path I create. The one big thing that created my reality was the amazing people who supported me, listened to me, and empowered me to think that I had as much rights to tell my story as anyone else. I was recently interviewed for a television show in Australia in which I was asked, who has been the biggest influence on me in my life? Every single person, good or bad, has shaped my perspectives and given me directions of who and how to be. Everyone has the ability to mentor and lead. It's up to all of us in our own ways to create change. We are all here because we make an impact with our work, our words and our energies. How do we create gender equality? I don't think it's that hard. Go back to basics. For me, many others, education, empowerment and culture were my saving grace. And I share my method with people all over the world in hopes that this message is shared and taken on by many more. But more importantly, continue the dialogue and support innovation from all, especially those who are directly impacted, our young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cummins. Let's now move to Dr. S. Sohe.